Live session, I clearly missed the countdown. It went 5, 4, 3, and I was busy talking. And then I realized when it gets to the end, that's when you're supposed to start. My name's Dave Anderson. I'm based in the future down here in Australia. It's lunchtime for us. It is Thursday evening for a good friend of mine, Sean Plankey, who is joining us. How are you, Sean?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
And awesome to see you again. I haven't seen you for a little while. Last time we caught up, we did a podcast together to talk about your history in cybersecurity. And there's probably no better time than now to have a
Shoot.
conversation about this because if we're brutally honest, and they normally put a disclaimer up on me at any given moment, but the sensitivities around cyber warfare and what's going on with Ukraine and Russia is naturally people are cautious about having conversations about it, and we felt like it could be an opportunity for us to have a conversation about it. I'm by no means an expert, but you're probably very well inclined to talk about this particular topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Cybersecurity, cyber warfare is my trade. I came up from the cyber warfare side on the offensive side up at U.S. Cyber Command in the United States, and now I've pivoted. Like many of us, many of my fellow colleagues, we're on the defensive side. We're trying to keep critical infrastructure safe around the world, and also advance, like a DataRobot here, advance the future of cybersecurity through AI.
So we joked around that we literally caught up 5 minutes before this, and we said we were going to build an agenda live. We are going to build an agenda live. So if there are people that want to ask Sean questions, I'll give you a bit of Sean's background for anyone that doesn't know. And Sean, you can help me with this. I tried this on the podcast, and I thought it was pretty good. Um, you worked at the White House for President Trump at the time to define some of the cyber strategies and, in fact, define some proactive cyber strategies that exist today. So, your background in understanding cyber warfare is second to none, or, a select few people in the world, and you're asked to comment on this on numerous times. So, if there are people out there that want to ask questions of someone that has a very good opinion as to how governments approach cyber, this would be an ideal time to ask your questions. And then naturally, you've pivoted now and you're working at DataRobot as an AI expert for cybersecurity. And so we probably, in terms of an agenda, I reckon those two are pretty good. Maybe we start by telling us about yourself. Did I get that right? And what's going on in the world? And what did you do? And what's the context? You've
I
only
mean,
got 30 minutes too. So,
I mean, Maverick, I think you forgot I need that number for truck driving school after this podcast.
that's
Um,
it.
but yeah, no, that's right. I did some time as the offensive weapons chief at U.S. Cyber Command, so designing, develop, operationalize cyber offensive capabilities for the U.S. Moved on, worked at one of the largest companies and what I think is one of the best companies in the world, and that's BP, the energy company. Little known, BP is the largest investor in renewables in the United States. They're also one of the top, 20 largest companies in the world. Um, and then I moved back to the White House, went back into government to help write offensive cyber warfare policies for the United States, and not only that, but also some defensive ones too, right? So we worked on the cyber workforce executive order, which is how do we get more people into the cyber workforce? How do we get more people defending the nation and the nation's critical infrastructure? And then how do we also, in my particular focus area, this is my secret love pet project is the maritime space, right? How do
Hmm.
we secure the maritime space, which is where 90% of all cargo by volume travels around the world is by water, right? We don't actually fly things around the world; we ship them on the water, and so that was my sweet spot. So coming here, seeing this next generation of knowing that what I always say is when I first started, it was we had no visibility. We didn't know what was going on there. We knew bad things were happening, but we didn't know what it was. And then we encouraged everyone, we put sensors out there. We put things that could see on the networks of the world, right? Once we started to be able to see things, we saw all of the good and the bad, and it became overwhelming. You're getting hit by a fire hose. And so once that fire hose started hitting, now it's the pivot to AI to say, hey, how do we, it's not about replacing humans, but how do we augment humans to shorten that decision cycle and separate the good from the bad, right? Separate the good from the bad and actually solve the problems that everyday humans need to be secure, to know that they can secure their personal finances, that they can trust the bank that they work with, that they can trust the electricity that's flowing through their house and through their devices. How do we ensure that now through cybersecurity and use AI to do that?
So I was going to ask one question, but I'm conscious also of the audience, and I do want to make this as interactive as possible. So as questions come
Sure.
in, I'm going to throw to them straight away. One of the ones that I do want to come back to is you talk a lot about offensive cyber strategies for the government. I'd like to go back to what does that mean and what does that entail? Because that was actually really fascinating to learn that the government went from being reactive to proactive and being able to attack others as a result of their attacking, companies and governments. But Ahmed's asked a really good question on how can AI tackle cyber warfare? So it's a pretty broad and open question to get started. And Ahmed, thanks for asking the question, and let's get into it, Sean.
Sure. So 2 points there. Let's first break it down. What is cyber warfare, right? So warfare in general is essentially what the leader of the government decides warfare is, right? Especially in cyberspace. So what I mean by that is, in the United States, we had attacks on Colonial Pipeline. Europe and the United States had attacks on Maersk that shut down global shipping. We've had attacks against Sony, to go back to that. We've had attacks
Yep.
against we've had attacks against different financials. And none of those things has the United States said they're war. That's warfare, right? So warfare, truthfully, is frankly whatever the leader of the government says it is, right? So if the president of the United States, in our case, my case, I should say, decides that it's war, then it's war. But if he doesn't say that that attack on critical infrastructure, such as Colonial Pipeline, is warfare, well, then it's not. So when we think about warfare, I want to caveat that. But then the real answer is, how can AI tackle it, right? And I break that down further. I like to look at the defensive front. So how can we use AI to defend? And when we talk about cybersecurity, there are very precise or needle threading attacks that have effects, right? Where an adversary, a nation state, would come in and do a series of effects to get right down to shutting a system down or something of that sophistication. And then there are broad scale attacks where you've heard of things like denial of service, right? Where DDoS, right? Denial of service, distributed denial of service, where we're just overloading the system or essentially jamming the internet from another aspect, right? AI is going to be very good at that broad scale attack, right? At seeing, hey, this is a denial of service attack. This thing, there is a bunch of people trying to overload our system all at once. We should off ramp here, and off ramp with telcos, backup circuits, backup internet. You use different like Cloudflare and different other providers that mitigate the cost of denial of service attacks. Automate AI, right? Artificial intelligence is going to do an excellent job at recognizing those major differences and off ramping your network to save you capacity, to save you cost, and to defend your network.
Yep.
Doing those very highly sophisticated attacks that take a sequence of events that a nation state might do over a period of 6, 8, 9 months, that's going to be very hard for AI to stop. just because it is so unique in characteristics. And now AI does provide an anomaly detection capacity, right? Saying, hey, that's different. But to stitch together a sequence of different events over a long period of time, 6 to 9 months, AI might not be the best response there.
Yeah, I was going to say anomaly detection is the key to how that works, right? Because it would look at the data patterns, it would see spikes in certain areas that it wouldn't normally see, and it would detect that as a problem. That's
Right.
fundamentally how this AI
Right.
would work. But then cyber criminals are and cyber gangs or whatever get more sophisticated and therefore can understand how AI is being used and therefore circumnavigate that to undertake different tactics, right?
That's right. That's right. And that's the one of the misconceptions about artificial intelligence is that it's like Skynet, right? Um, it's Skynet, it's the Terminator. It's able to handle every situation and optimize it for the best outcome. The reality is that AI at this point in time, right? We 2022, AI does best at augmenting human intelligence.
Yeah.
So AI does an excellent job at shortening that decision cycle and saying, I've observed this, I've oriented us, and I recommend this decision. So now the human on that decision loop doesn't have to observe something. It can just say, orient, decide, I agree with that decision, and act. And so humans who deal with infinite possibilities in every situation are now shuttered or filtered down to one, two, or three decision paths as recommended by an AI system and can act on that and act instantly, as opposed to the previous, which was, hey, I had to observe all of these things, I had to orient myself, had to decide out of these infinite number of decision base and act on it.
Yeah, so in your experience, the AI at the moment, in the majority of cases, is still requiring a human in the loop. These systems aren't out of control
Absolutely.
doing whatever they need to do. You still need a human in order to augment that and make the ultimate decision, right?
That's right. And I actually would encourage at this point in time with technology, that's what we want, right? That's what we want. I think about things about resiliency, right? And we think about critical infrastructure in the countries around the world. That we need resiliency. We need these power systems, these financial systems, these water systems. We need these things to stay online. And we're not at a point where we can just put that away and have an automated system do it completely. We still need humans in that cycle to ensure that the Dave Andersons of the world, their power stays on so they can do these podcasts. So that you had no, but more importantly, that you have fresh drinking water, right?
Yeah.
That you aren't having other critical infrastructure issues, right? That the financial system for our countries is staying online. And those things, I don't think we're at a point uh, in human nature where we can just leave that to automation, leave that to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so one of the things that you said, and if there are other questions, please fire away and ask. Ahmed, that was a really good question. But also in your answer, you said cyber warfare versus cyber attack. And you said in most cases, the attacks on Sony or Garmin or the other ones that you mentioned, they're cyber attacks. They're not cyber war. Is there cyber war going on? Have governments defined this as cyber war, and is this a dovetail now into a conflict between what's happening to the Ukraine?
So there is cyber warfare going on. I would state that there is cyber warfare going on between Russia and Ukraine right now, because they are in a physical state of conflict, right? If you're in a physical state of conflict, it's silly to say like, oh, we're in land combat right now, but we're not in cyber conflict, right? If you're in warfare, you're in warfare. So, um, so there definitely is cyber warfare going on. I will go back now. If we were going to bring in the U.S. or Australia or New Zealand or the UK or any other major country in the world, I would pose it to their leadership to say they're not going to say that they're in warfare until they decide that they're in warfare, right? And we'll leave that at that. But there's obvious cyber warfare going on between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, right at the beginning of the Russians' operations, military operations into Ukraine, what did they do? They took down the Viasat system that was the satellite provider over Ukraine, right? And that shut down a lot of visibility. It shut down the eyes in the sky and communications over the battlefield, right? So no longer could people see what Russia was doing. No longer could people communicate and drive reinforcements to where they were needed. Russia took that down literally 3 minutes, within 3 minutes of their commencement of invasion, right? So that is cyber warfare being used to augment physical activity. We're seeing that. You saw there's an enormous amount of propaganda going on, which is information warfare over the cyber domain. So Russia is using that two different ways. Internally, Russia is putting propaganda into Russia, saying, "Hey, we're freeing the Russian people in the Ukraine. We're protecting Russian citizens in the Ukraine. We're freeing the Donbass region of attack by the Ukrainians." They're talking about denazification, saying, "Hey, we're denazifying the Ukraine," and they're telling that story back into Russia to make the people of Russia who have their sons and daughters, fighting, knowing that having them thinking that it's not a bad invasion, it's not offensive. This is defensive. This is a defensive operation. So there is that cyber warfare going on right now.
Yeah, the world's changed because we talk a lot about how technology is embedded in our lives. We can't really exist without it. So then it makes complete sense that in a traditional war, as difficult as it is to even talk about these topics, I find it a little confronting at times to talk about it. I should premise that with people. Like we're by no means strategists, and we feel for everyone in this particular conflict. But it just naturally goes without saying that there's going to be cyber and technology tactics used in this particular warfare.
No, that's right. That's right. You can't get past it. I mean, and then when you see Elon Musk, right, who's now owns Twitter, but when you see him use SpaceX to then counteract the fact that Viasat's down and provide a whole new information system and a whole new domain to the to the operation, right? That's another avenue where now you've essentially rolled out a whole new terrain, right? We think of land, sea, and space, air, but now you've rolled out the satellite domain, right? So now you have space as a whole new domain and a whole new information terrain for an operation.
Yeah, that's so like, but you when you own the satellite infrastructure and then you own communications and it's owned privately, that there are elements of like, I don't know how comfortable I am with that because you're trusting that these people aren't evil. Don't you think? Like as you sort of said, it's called the Star Network, and you're like, go back 10 years and go. So there's going to be this guy, right, called Elon Musk, and he's going to own this stuff, all the communications. That normally would cause governments probably to go, who is this guy, and what's his motive?
And he has more money than
Australia.
The majority of I was going to say the majority of nations in the world, right? Right.
Yeah.
Like, that is a separate interesting dilemma, right? Because he could, I wouldn't say that he could amass like an army against someone, but he could control the information domain, right? He could control the ability for to influence the public perception and population. I mean, you've seen this last week. He said he's buying Twitter to open up First Amendment rights back to Americans and saying you can say what you want. We're going to allow people back on Twitter. And then you had, one side of the equation, right, the political equation. who was free speech, is now saying, "Oh my gosh, he's going to destroy us by letting free speech back open." Right. So you have both sides who are saying they're pro free speech arguing against each other,
Well,
because one person who happens to be the richest man in the world is buying a major method of communications.
yeah, I mean, technology is changing our lives dramatically every single day and it's changing the way that governments have to govern. And so then I want to come back to Ahmed's question, who's asked another
Yeah.
really good question. And if there are others on here that want to ask questions, please take the opportunity to do that. But Ahmed, this is a really good question. And it was one that I touched on a little earlier, which is we talked, and I'll quote what he said: the reactive approach is pretty clear now, but when you say we need to have a proactive approach, what do you mean by that? Is it having a defense plus attacking abilities at the same time?
So I'm thinking it means a couple different things. So when I think of it from the private sector, right? Because I'm in the private sector now. I got the on this side, big old DataRobot here. It's not a tattoo though; it's just on the shirt, just for the record. Um, but when I think about it from the private sector side, I think of resiliency and how do we make ourselves proactive. We have to actually think through what the risk might be. And so when I think of risk, I think of threat, vulnerability, and consequence. So break it down. Threat. Threat means that there's an adversary who has intent and capability to do something against me. So if I'm an AI company, who might that threat be? Well, I'm an AI company. We've had multiple countries in the world, right? To give you an example, no secret, China has said they're going to be the leader in AI.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's a potential threat actor. Do they have intent to dominate the world in AI? Yes, they do. Xi Jinping, the president of China, has said that. Do they have capability? Yes, they do. We know they're one of the most advanced cyber countries in the world, right? So, boom, hit that one on threat. Vulnerability now. Okay, I'm at DataRobot. Does the DataRobot like system, inherently our security protocols, our relationships with governments that we operate in, are there vulnerabilities? And what are we doing to mitigate those, right? Does the actor's capability match up to our vulnerability? That would raise our risk level. And then the third piece of that is the consequence. So when we think about consequence in cyber, the mistake is made that it's always thought that it's the first order consequence. It's what happened right then and there. So if I think of, I'm going to go back, I'm going to turn the clocks back here and look at the NotPetya attack against Maersk
Mhm.
back in 2017. NotPetya was malware released from Russia and the Ukraine. Attacked the Ukraine. It got into Maersk's system. It dropped all of Maersk's shipping terminals around the world and crashed their servers everywhere. Right. The initial thought was that the cost was $300,000 to Maersk. They had to replace their computer systems.
Mm.
The reality was their cost was in the billions because their ships couldn't move. They couldn't leave port. They didn't know where cargo was going. They had to reorient their entire business operation to come back online and be the number one shipping provider in the world. That cost is actually in the billions, right? So when we think about resiliency and we think about consequence, you have to recognize what is that second and third order effect? What is day two? What is day five after a cyber attack? So if I take that and bring it all back home, right, and say consequence, vulnerability, and threat, then I know my risk. Now I can be proactive and say, okay, hey, I didn't think that was that important before. Now I understand that's more important than it was, right? Now I understand that there's a higher level of significance here than I previously thought.
So thinking through the variables and the scenarios of what could play out, and do you think would other shipping companies now, having understood what happened to Maersk, would then also be able to learn from that and go, okay, how do we navigate against that?
That's right. That's right. And so, you know, I worked at a major shipping company of energy products. We started to run after what happened to Maersk is we started to run through scenarios and say, okay, what happens if in this region of the world a cyber event shuts down the supply chain, right? Like there's an attack against the industrial control systems. Maybe it's a pipeline, maybe it's a bridge that doesn't open and close. Maybe it's maybe it's a cargo crane can't move and it's blocking a port, something like that regard. What happens there? All right, so you start to walk the dog there and say, okay, what's the supply chain? Well, this is a Siemens equipment, or this is a Schneider equipment, or this is whatever the major equipment provider is, and you realize, well, who services that? One of the things that we surfaced was that in certain remote or semi-remote parts of the world, there's only a few experts on scene. And so if you have an issue and you know there's two other companies that operate very similar equipment in your space, and I'm going to stick with Alaska in this case, and they also use the same provider, well, there's a high likelihood if one of you is hit, then all three of you are hit. And that provider, you can't, I mean, we're still human. We can't physically be in 2 or 3 places at once. So now your consequence is much higher, and then you can augment your risk appropriately, right? You have to start thinking about those resiliency cases and how you could respond. Now, if we shift that to financials, something that AI is very good at predicting and calculating, we could say something like, what happens if Swift banking transactions fail in the modern world? What happens if they're, hacked and now the overnight trading desks can't move cash flow? Well, how many days could a major company, a corporation around the world last? And that when you start to understand that, now you can augment your resiliency, right? These are non-cyber actions that are preventing the consequence of a cyber event. So the cyber event would be a cyber attack that shuts down Swift banking, which we know as the overnight trading desk, the transaction trading desk between major banks. So a cyber event shuts down Swift banking, but instead of handling that that consequence being the end of your business, you looked at it from a resiliency perspective and you realized, okay, the likelihood of Swift banking being shut down for over 2 days is low, but 1 day is high. So I need to have a cash reserve on hand of over 1 day to make sure that I can get through to that next event, right? That's the type of cyber resiliency you want to provide, and that's how you want to measure that risk.
And what role does AI play in that? Have you got a simple explanation for how it works?
So my simple explanation on the AI front would be the ability to detect that consequence faster, right? So I look at that, I use a phrase called continuity of the economy. Okay, because that's what it is, right? Swift banking transactions, the money flow. So can we use AI to detect that consequence faster than after Dave Anderson, you're the head of Citibank and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm hit. And it took a human that moment to understand that. Could you use AI to throw that flag earlier so you could kick off that protocol, that response faster?
So faster response times.
That's right. Equals more resiliency.
And then that's down to also, you mentioned the lack of resourcing or the lack of skills base. So if you've got more people that can absorb the information and act on it rather than have your good people focused on doing the analysis.
That's right. It's exactly right. Can you raise the level of thinking so good people are focused on the response instead of identifying the response? That's right.
Gotcha. So how long have you been a DataRobot for now?
So, I got this blue shirt on. Man, I keep turning the wrong way. I got this blue shirt on because that means I'm over a year.
Yeah.
So I'm proudly wearing my blue DataRobot. I think this is the evolution of the robot. He
Oh,
turned
is that what
blue after
happens?
1 year.
I didn't know
Yeah,
this. I'm just finding this out. Like, so okay, so
yeah,
you get it after a year, you get one of those shirts. Okay, good.
yeah. I
Um,
think there's other colors after that, but I don't know yet.
Tell me a story, and thank you everyone for the questions that are coming in, and also just so you know, and to boost your own ego, Sean Ahmed said much appreciated and well explained, which is a very nice compliment. So thank you, Ahmed, for asking those questions, and then also for following up with a compliment. Sean really needs it. Um, it doesn't really, but what I was going to say was, you've been at DataRobot for a year now. Tell me a story that might surprise people, that even surprised you. A use case, an outcome, a value, just something that someone goes,
Hmm.
you're sitting around. I always use the dinner party analogy. So you're sitting around a dinner party. It's like, I can't remember the last time I sat at a dinner party. So let's just go, you're at the pub and someone turns to you and goes, what do you do for work? I work at DataRobot. What do they do? Well, they're an AI platform that help people, blah, blah, blah. Oh, really? Like, give me an example.
Well, I'll give
Bang.
you my most exciting moment.
All right.
So my most exciting moment just happened a couple weeks ago. Um, we we had been working with the Department of Homeland Security in the United States, and they have a branch called the Science and Technology branch that is starting an office called SciLab, which is their cyber lab. Which what they want to do is ad, advance next generation cybersecurity capabilities to protect the homeland of the United States, right? Homeland
Yep.
Security. And so they're growing out and they're deciding what they want to do, and they decided that they needed an AI platform, and so um, they came to us, and we've been in discussions, and we're trying to make things happen with them on being the AI platform for cybersecurity inside of Scilab. And to me, that was huge, right? Like that, the fact that we could service. I mean, there's 19 different agencies inside of Department of Homeland Security, and the fact that we might be that AI platform to help defend the nation against cyber attacks. That's next generation stuff to me, and I think that's really exciting.
It's exciting, and it's exciting for given your history as well. So, passion for what you do and also purpose. It's one of the reasons why I joined AI, is because I believe it could do things for good, not and it can give people back time. It can make us more secure. It can theoretically give us more time to do things that we love doing, like talking to you.
That's
But
right.
it's always one of those ones that the more you automate, the more you geek out, the more you get excited by it, the more you want to influence change. And I think that's the opportunity for AI, right? The opportunity now is actually instigating change in organizations and in governments into the way that they work, make us smarter and make decisions with intelligence.
That's 100% right. Augmenting the intelligence, shorten the decision cycle, drive us to to perform the higher level functions that our brains were built for.
Perfect way to wrap, because they only want us talking for half an hour, and you and I could talk underwater. And
Absolutely.
it's always a pleasure to catch up. And the last time we caught up, I just looked at my messages and it said something like, "You have avocado on your face," and I didn't quite understand what that meant, unless I literally had avocado on my face.
I I
You
just
don't
I
know, do
just
you?
yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah, okay, that's a good way to finish. Hey, thanks everyone for the questions and comments. If there's anything you like, listen to this and you enjoyed it, we would love your feedback. So let us know. We often like positive feedback more than negative, just like normal humans. But if there's something that you would really like for us to cover or for Sean to cover in a future episode, we'd also happily spend another half an hour coming back on here and talking about it, because it's what we love doing. Sean, enjoy the rest of your wine.
Thank you, thank you.
Sean, have
Hey, we're in the evening here
you are.
in the United States. So.
Good luck to the Celtics after they just had a 4-0 sweep of the Nets. Apologies for any Brooklyn fans out there, but I'm very excited about the Celtics this year. Harron, thanks for letting us know. Wish you good posts. Thank you. And thanks, Jim and everyone else for sharing the love today on this LinkedIn live session. I'm going to get on with the rest.